Hi, welcome back to Life and Death and Dirt. We have a very exciting episode today because this is our little baby podcast's very first time having a guest. And our guest is someone who a lot of you might be familiar with. Her name is Rachel Bryan. Rachel, welcome to Life and Death and Dirt. Thank you for being here. We're very excited to have you. You seem very excited to be here, which makes me happy. And Rachel Bryan, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Thank you so much for having me. I've said this a million times, but DJ Lewis is my favorite person on planet Earth. And the fact that he exists just brings me so much joy. I was re-listening to Butthole Mace like 2 days ago. And yeah, I just get so happy that DJ is a real person. And obviously, Rosie, I'm very happy that you're a real person too. But
I
yeah, so my name
understand
is
if you
Rachel
love
Bryan.
DJ more, though. That's normal. I get it. I feel the same
I
way.
mean, I'm sure you do too. But yeah, I'm a PhD in literature. I study Southern literature. I'm a very recent PhD. I know I look like I'm 5 years old. And
Congratulations.
sorry, I've got a little bit of a head cold today. But yeah, I finished my dissertation over the summer and I study working class Southern women's writing. So I look at writers like Jesmyn Ward, Dorothy Allison. I don't know if I should say my institutional affiliation because I'm a little rough around the edges sometimes. But I
Understood.
teach at the University of Tennessee. Did my graduate school work there. Also volunteers the vice president of the Flannery O'Connor Society, which makes me sound really fancy. It's
Wow.
a lot of email. Yeah. Love Flannery O'Connor. But while I was completing my dissertation, so the last like 2-3 years of my graduate school program, I lost 4 family members, 2 pets. One was my grandmother, my last living grandmother, my maternal grandmother, Nanny. And my sister and I did her last 50 hours of hospice caregiving. I would leave school on a Thursday, drive to Alabama. We would normally my sister and I did shifts together because it was a 2-person job. We're not nurses. So trying to coordinate that was a lot. I would drive to Nashville, jump in the car with my sister, drive to Alabama, do 2 days, get in the car, drive back to Nashville, drive back to Knoxville in time to teach. And that was my life for like a year. And she passed on April 23rd of this year. And I dove right into the last little bit of writing my dissertation, which was about gendered labors of care. So that was really rough. And it had some real implications on my writing, on my research, on the direction that I want to go in with my scholarship. But I wouldn't trade any of the last year and the time I got with her for anything. But I can't help but acknowledge like the real gendered trauma that comes from women being natural born caregivers and women providing the emotional weight of shepherding people out of this world primarily. And I think a lot of my focus is on applying terms of labor unrest and collective bargaining and labor strikes to the work that women do in the home, in the bedroom for children. So that's a lot what
You
my
got DJ's
research
attention.
does.
That's amazing. Let me ask you something. Did you intentionally, was this your, did one have any influence on the other as far as the end of life care? Was it watching your people die, or was this all organic?
That's a great question. So it actually started with my dissertation prospectus, which I wrote in like my 3rd or 4th year of grad school. And I had a publication years ago in just this little tiny literary magazine about the novel Sing, Unburied, Sing, which I've like evangelized about. Jesmyn Ward was actually a teacher at Tulane when I did my master's there. And I never got to take a class with her because she was on sabbatical writing this book. But I had a publication about it a few years ago. And one thing that struck me about that book is that it's about a terrible mother, right? And she acknowledges in the book, she is a terrible mother. The critics acknowledge she's a terrible mother. Her children do. It's about the failures of being able to efface yourself enough to provide caregiving labor. So that for me was really that, and the novel Bastard Out of Carolina by Dorothy Allison. Those were my jumping off points into questioning like this myth about Southern women being workhorses and broodmares, right? This myth of Southern women not resisting the caregiving labor that is so ingrained in us from childhood. And then Nanny got cancer. Then her primary caregiver, my uncle, passed away very suddenly in February of 2022. And now caregiver is a loose term there. He was living off the grid to avoid the IRS and adopted my granddad's identity for 10 years to like, yeah. So caregiver is a stretch, but he did his best. And we knew something was wrong when he kept telling us she's cooking weird stuff for me, right? So we knew that like her cancer had progressed and things were progressing when that was what he was saying was she's cooking for me and it's weird. He's putting weird combinations in front of me. But anyways, he died in February, and then I think I got like a chapter written after that, and I had to like rush to the finish line to get my dissertation finished. So because I don't think there's a lot of leeway in what happens when the real world interferes with your research. It didn't start necessarily as something. I've never provided care before, right? I'm not a mother. I was very lucky for 10 years. I lost no one in my family. And then it all kind of came to a head.
Yeah, you said you lost 4 family members and 2 pets within just a few years. Is that what you said? Oh my word. Okay.
Yeah. So cousin, my uncle, a great aunt who I adored, and my grandmother. And then I lost my bunny Maybell. You can see her here. If you follow me on Instagram, you know me and my bunnies.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And then the week after my grandmother passed, my elderly disabled rabbit Gus came down with something called vestibular disease, which is like a really terrifying disease. He passed away from that just a couple weeks ago, actually. So I feel like the angel of death this last year, and I've just been like really navigating grief, but trying to do so in a way that for me is productive, which has always been through writing.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So that's so crazy. So you got the first chapter was already done, and then the death came, and then you had to rush. Is that was because there was a time limit, or was that because there was a time limit on it? Wow. She didn't even get to really think it through. Like, do you feel different about it now? Like looking back on any of the work, like, because I mean, obviously it takes time to really process this kind of stuff. Or at least I've learned like that there are things like, emotions that I were having or ways that I was responding to things. Are there things that you wish you had added, or things that you look back on and go like, well, that's interesting that I was feeling that at that time, or anything of that nature?
We just had a really scary moment in the family group chat because me and my mom and sister realized we couldn't remember what we did for Thanksgiving last year. Not one of us could remember where we went, where we were, what state we were in, did we eat last Thanksgiving? We had no memory. We had to go through our camera rolls and our old text messages to figure out what we did last Thanksgiving, because grief and trauma just kind of overtook this year. Because it was really like none of us lived in Alabama, right? Me and my mom and sister did not live in Alabama, and we're having to like coordinate. And Rosie, I know in an earlier podcast you talked about how last minute hospice can become. This was a Jesus take the wheel hospice situation. Like we were all kind of just flinging things and hoping they stuck and hoping we weren't hurting her, because it was very much none of us know what we're doing, but like we are going to do our best in this situation. So it definitely I had zero time to process. Nanny died April 23rd, funeral April 25th. I went straight into a conference in May. I edited and wrote and revised 220 pages over the month of June. I taught a summer
Wow.
class in July, defended at the 1st of August, started a postdoctoral lectureship in at the end of August, and have been teaching 4 classes all semester. So I haven't had more than like a day to feel my feelings. And it's resulted in memory loss. It's resulted in
Yeah.
some really complicated things that I'm very fortunate. I've never had to deal with these things or process these emotions. So I think the one aspect of caregiving that I think is so often neglected. In feminist theory, we talk a lot about motherhood and like providing care to children. But I think an author not too long ago who wrote an article for the Baffler said that elder care isn't sexy. So we don't talk about it a lot. Even in my dissertation, when I was writing about labors of care, elder care or hospice care was always just kind of tacked on to the end, right? It's women provide this kind of care and this kind of care. Oh, and also women primarily shepherd people out of this world, right? Like it was just so
Wow.
the gravity of it is so downplayed in conversations. So I think that for me it's so important to speak to like how these processes of providing care shape the way women associate themselves with the world, right? Think about women being responsible primarily, not exclusively, for bringing life into this world and bringing it out. I was just thinking about this the other day, and maybe this is a question for DJ. DJ, when was the last time you saw your own blood?
Like just earlier today, like like honestly, I was changing out the front of the headlight, and but I probably see my own blood a lot more than most people do.
He's probably the exception. Yeah, DJ's going to be the exception.
Oh my gosh. I was going to make a great point about how, like, not exclusively women, but a lot of women have a really close proximity to the life death cycle, the life cycle of blood, the life cycle. Like, we're very intimate with life and death and desensitized to it from an early age because we have to become comfortable and not panic when we see our own blood, right? And I think, I don't know that it's something, especially in the South, when it gets into issues of isolation, rurality, access to care, these kinds of pressures that are put on women psychologically. I don't think they also often result in fair associations with ourselves and each other.
That's very true, and also like when me just being an idiot is one thing, but like having having a cycle, it's got to be weird. It's got to be like the life cycle that you are unwillingly. It's like not willingly, right? It's just like it's forced upon you. It's forced upon you to face. That's crazy, dude. That's crazy. Yeah, I do not have that association, and I very much do. People, let me ask you this. I have a lot of respect for it. Do people have a? Do people think that like? I think birth is the most unsexy thing. When you said sexy, it's not as sexy. Like I can't think of anything grosser.
I mean, like, sorry, I meant like politically sexy. Like
Oh,
this is
okay,
like
okay,
like
yeah, yeah, yeah,
abortion care is
yeah,
like
oh,
a
yeah,
politically sexy
yeah,
thing to
yeah.
get
Okay, it's saucy. It's saucy. Yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah,
like, appropriate legal representation for folks who
yeah.
work in informal conditions of providing elder care, that's not necessarily a sexy political angle to take. The article that was referenced in there is Kathleen Geyer. It's called Childcare, Elder Care, and the Last Feminist Frontier. It's for the Baffler magazine. And I think she makes a really good point that we move our focus as feminists, right, to these other areas of women's labor and kind of participate in the assumption that providing elder care is requisite or valorous, right? And I'm really uncomfortable with valorizing any kind of labor or obligating any kind of labor. And I think that that's a really radical position to take, because I would also never say that it's not an inherently good thing to care for the people you love. But when that's met with conditions of, for example, Rosie, I think you could speak to this a lot better than I could as a working hospice nurse. You know that, like, my experience with hospice was that we did like the day-to-day stuff, and hospice came and like checked on her, brought medicine, they gave her a bath, they answered our questions, right? It wasn't that the hospice nurse in our case was doing like sitting with her on a day-to-day basis. Most of the time, at least in small southern towns, it's like some woman named Brenda who has no nursing experience, who sits with the elderly and is paid under the table, right? That is rife for exploitative labor conditions. And it's something that we just kind of push to the side because we don't want to have a conversation about, first of all, the access that our elders have to care. But second of all, we don't want to devalorize women being natural caregivers. And we don't want to devalorize women having this obligation to provide this inherently socially beneficial service, because that would destabilize a lot of really beneficial systems that we have, right? Where elders become out of sight, out of mind for us, not a communal obligation.
It's so wild to think of the two, because both the elderly and women are marginalized in such a huge capacity throughout all of society. It's amazing. This is wild. This is wild to think that, like, that it probably is being exploited to some degree. Like, not that
200%. Yes, 200% it's being exploited. Yeah, and you've said so many amazing things, Rachel. My mind is just like reeling, trying to keep up and figure out like what questions I have and what I want to say. But it's so, yes, I think what you're saying is that, well, in a much simpler way, the way that I say that is that there are careers that are typically female careers: teachers, nurses, flight attendants. And all of those people tend to be, even though you need tons of education and training and you are a professional who's been trained to do these things, it's very minimized, and it's like called a calling. Well, especially teaching and healthcare workers, it's called a calling. And the reason they call it a calling is so that it can be exploited, because a calling is something that you don't do for money, right? That's something that you do because Jesus wants you to, or whatever. And so, and then a lot of people that work with elderly, that care for the elderly, oh my gosh, you're a saint, you're an angel, right? Those are all those words, like you're saying, where you're valorizing the actual skilled, highly skilled labor and very, very needed labor that people are doing, usually women in those roles. And so it's much easier to exploit those roles. Yes, absolutely. Burn it down. You are 100% correct. Yep. And you're right, absolutely. That woman, Brenda, like you said, she's not a formal caregiver, but man, she takes care of every single person in the community. She's killing her own body to do it, to care for all these other people in the community. And without the Brendas of the world, we would be in a much worse place. But they are being sacrificed on the altar of capitalism to take care of our aging folks. And you mentioned that when your grandma was on hospice, how the day-to-day caregiving fell onto you and your family. And that's absolutely true across the board. Unfortunately, the way that hospice is funded in this country does not give enough funding for hospice professionals to actually come in and do that day-to-day care. We would in a heartbeat if we could. Ask any hospice nurse or any hospice home health aide. But Medicare does not value that. They don't reimburse for any of that.
Like, I hate to participate in the over like sainthood language that is often used for these women, but the hospice nurse Carmen, who answered my phone call at 6 a.m., I'm gonna start crying, when I couldn't take the death rattle anymore. I'd never heard it before. My grandmother's was really loud. And it had been 35 hours of listening to a very loud death rattle. I couldn't take it anymore. I called Carmen at 6 a.m., the hospice worker, just ugly crying. Me and my sister had been fighting all night because like we were just trying to make it stop. And she like talked me off of a ledge. So I don't mean to say like by her not being there, like, swabbing Nanny's mouth to keep her mouth from drying out, right? No, her not doing that didn't mean that it wasn't the most valuable service ever. It just was like, I think there are misconceptions about what hospice means. Like, I think a lot of people would assume if you go on hospice, there is someone assigned to you to come, be at your loved one's side. And, that for a lot of people, especially working class people, that's not the case. And someone has to informally figure out how to take on that caregiving roles, because it's not something that is just doled out to them. But that's not to say that the hospice care we received was not stellar. Carmen was the MVP of the day. But
Yeah.
Give
yeah,
a
that
shout
was
out
our
to
experience.
Carmen. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
didn't think that at all, that
Yeah.
wasn't how it came across. I just understand what you were saying. And a lot of people have that they're kind of surprised when hospice comes in because they're like, wait, we have to do it? And we're like, yeah, I'm sorry you do. Like it's not, and it's just literally because our country doesn't value that caregiving like you said, and doesn't provide the funding for us to do it. Unfortunately, yeah. But shout out to Carmen. I have a question.
Shout
Did you
out.
have
And
Carmen's
Haley and Tracy.
and Haley and Tracy? So did you secretly have their personal cell phone numbers?
Carmen's, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did.
They're not supposed to do that, but they do, yeah, I see. Oh, bless her. Thank you, Carmen. And Tracy, and who else did you say?
So we had some informal help, right? So Haley and Tracy, a mom and daughter who are just part of the community. Haley, I will say, and I feel kind of weird like telling her business, but Haley is a CNA and like has lots of experience in nursing homes and whatnot. Her mother was very new, did not have medical training, but both of them provided stellar care. And when we could not be with our grandmother, we fully trusted these women to take care of her. Like it was never, they were remarkable and loved my nanny and were so good to her. But yeah, I mean, our experience was just like a series of, I think, failures in the care that we provide the elderly. I mean, last summer, me and my sister had to do another 50-hour stint in the Huntsville hospital because yes, my grandmother was in the hospital and there are nurses available. She was also ripping out her IV and had dementia and could not be left alone. So we couldn't leave her alone in the hospital, right? And like both of us had jobs and had to work and wanted to be there with her at the same time. So it's this really like, I don't necessarily begrudge people who have to send their elderly family members to live in a nursing home when that might not be what the family member wants, because what is the other option? Like it's no sleep, it's driving 2.5 hours both ways to be in a hospital for 50 hours with no bed. And this isn't to say that the nursing staff weren't there for my grandmother, but she couldn't be left alone. She couldn't feed herself at that point, so we were kind of tasked with picking up a lot of system slack that I think there was.
Sure, it always falls back onto the people. So when you say part of the community, do you mean part of your personal community, part of your grandmother's community, or just people who are
Usually I find that these things work word of mouth. So one thing that I wrote about a little bit in my dissertation was the distinction between formal and informal labor. And on the surface, I think we get it, but it's more complicated than that. So formal labor is where you have a W-2 or you go clock in to your shift, right? Informal labor is a lot of different things, right? It can be childcare that is not paid work. That's something you do. It's work you do around your house to produce a human, and that human eventually provides capitalist value to the society, right? It's
Right.
called necessary labor by Karl Marx. But the other option is informal work, like it's studied a lot for African American women in hair braiding. It's not done necessarily always like in a salon. Sometimes it's in your house. Sometimes you're just paid cash or you barter, right? So this was a situation where, in our case at least, the caregivers were word of mouth. We'd heard, oh, there are these two great women who sit with the elderly. Like that's their job title. They sit with the elderly, and you hire them that way, just through word of mouth. They're just two women who are known in the community, like in your small town, for providing these services. And they are great at what they do, but they also don't have the protections that you might have in a formal working environment. So, like, I can say, "Ooh, how family drama." I can say that we weren't in charge of how Haley and Tracy were compensated or the protections that they got. Like, me and my mom and sister did not handle that, and that's all I'll say. So, like, recourse for what happens if they're just unpaid? Who do they go to? There's no corporate to call, there's no HR, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I mean when I talk about that distinction between informal and formal work. And I think these structures also apply to women who are just expected to provide caretaking labor for their husband's parents, right? Like it's not just I view this as all part of the same informal economy.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I definitely like I'm I definitely am a part of that system. I mean, that's how I made the majority of my money is somebody calling me and saying, "Hey, we need help over here." I mean, that's all I do. You know what I mean? It's like I don't have any working job title. I mean, I guess whatever I do artistically, I guess whatever, but like for the most part, how I get the majority of my money is going and helping build a barn or feed cattle or you know what I'm saying, or help fix pipes and shit. That's like it also takes up most of my time, but also at the same time, I don't know. It's crazy. The whole stuff. It's crazy. It's wild. The informal barter system. I've just always called it the barter system. But it's wild to me that there's people in the community to do that for end of life care. I've never looked into it. And would it be like through a church? Like, how did you find them at the at the hospital, or did somebody just say, "Hey, you need to call up Haley now because they know what's up"?
That, yes, call up Haley and then they
Jesus.
know what's up. Like, and I'm sure Rosie, like you know about this as well, like how these kinds of you probably have had moments where you've provided hospice care and the primary caregiver is someone that you've seen with like multiple different clients. I
Right.
don't know
Yep.
if that's something that you've experienced where you like, oh yeah, this woman sits with John, but she also sits with Susie as well sometimes. So you like coordinate care through this third party who is totally informally employed. And I don't want to sound like I'm completely making informal labor out to be a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a vital thing. Like so much of our society functions on this informal work. But I do think it's worth noting that like there are issues with not having any kind of sort of labor protections associated with that informal work. Like DJ, you don't get health insurance for going to help
Yeah,
somebody
right.
like
Yeah.
put up a barn,
Yeah.
right? But then also on the other side, it does allow for a steady income for folks who might have kids and like need to bring their kids with them. Most of the time, like in these
Oh, a
kinds of
lot of
roles,
that.
you can bring your kids with you,
Yeah.
or you're a felon, for example, and are having trouble, you can like take this on potentially as kind of an informal work. I think in that case you would want to go through a service, so you got that W-2. But like,
Yeah,
it allows it also these informal economies allow for flexibility too.
sure, sure. I mean, if I ever get,
But one thing,
go ahead.
well, one thing I was going to bring up, and part of the reason I know this is very social science based, like everything I'm saying here is kind of more current events, sociology, culture studies issues than literary. I try to tie these issues back to novels that we read, right? So, for me, so I studied 20th century American Southern literature, and everything that I've just said here can also be seen in the literature that we celebrate as being representative of the South. So, like one book that I would ask if either of y'all have ever read is As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. Do y'all have any either of y'all have any experience with that book?
I don't know. I have not read that book, but tell me more. I'm hanging on
That's
your every word, Rachel. So yeah, spill it. Tell us everything.
Well, I was so As I Lay Dying is probably the most taught Faulkner book. It's his easiest book to read, right? He wrote it supposedly in 6 weeks, but that's not necessary. He liked to exaggerate a little bit. Um, it is very it's the story of a family who is taking their dying and then dead mother across the state to be buried, right? That's the whole story. That's the plot. A woman has died and her family is moving her body to be buried with her people. Um, and one thing that we see in that novel is the character Dewey Dale. And I know that's a really funny name. She's the daughter. She's the only daughter of all the other sons, of Addie and Angie Bundren. Those are the parents. and so Addie Bundren, one thing that makes this novel really cool is you get to hear from the dead after they've died, right? So Addie has her own chapter. But I'm really fascinated by Dewey Dale's character because I think that she really exemplifies these kinds of like psychological issues with end of life caregiving that I'm seeing, which is um so Dewey Dale's pregnant, right? Out of wedlock secretly. She can't tell anybody. And in the early chapters, you don't know that, but she is constantly fanning her mother before she dies, right? She's got this fan and she is fanning her mother. She fans her mother for 10 days straight, fans her mother, stands there. When anybody comes to talk to Addie, Dewey Dale's going to answer for her. Dewey Dale's going to jump in and provide an answer on behalf of her mom. And all the men in the family act kind of like Dewey Dale is being ridiculous, right? For this overprotective relationship she has with her mother's like dying body. Um, and I can't help but think about how we talk about women's fragility in these moments, right? Like as soon as Addie dies, Dewey Dale's father, Angie Bundren, says, okay, get in there and go fix us something to eat. Right. So she has just not left her mother's bedside for 10 days, has provided this care, has fanned her body to keep her cool for 10 days, and then is told by her dad, get in there and fix us something to eat. Right. And while she's bringing new life into this world, right, because she's pregnant and at this point probably knows she's pregnant. So the Bundrens are a super working class family. Like Angie Bundren is like presented as this kind of philandering, no good kind of man. And the punchline of the novel, I hate to give it away, spoiler alert. The punchline of the novel is on their way back from burying Addie, Angie picks up his new wife, right? So the novel ends with him introducing the new Mrs. Bundren because he can't imagine going without a wife. Like he's got to have that labor. But my point in bringing all that up is we can see these kinds of informal economies at play in our own psyches, right? If Faulkner is representative of a moment in the South's history, at this point it was the 1930s. If Faulkner is representative of the way that we talk about our culture and our world, there is a self-aware acknowledgement of this kinds of dissatisfaction that we have with the way that women's labor is expected to be performed. And that's why I focus on the social aspects of literature.
Go ahead, DJ.
Yes. Huh?
We're both blown away. I can tell by the looks on our faces.
Yeah, my brain is totally boiling. Yes, absolutely. It's amazing that like caregiving has or like being concerned has been turned into a weakness. Number one, that's like the first thing that I think when you talk about the fragility that concern, that care is something that is weak and not to be. And how did that ever happen? How did that ever like how it's like it's I don't
So glad you asked.
okay, cool, awesome.
So there's this essay from the 1970s that I fall back on a lot, and it is so dated and it's so essentialist, but it is so right. So it's Sherry Ortner's early feminist essays, Female to Male as Nature is to Culture. It's published in 1972, and it's like an early feminist essay that tries to make sense of just the question, why are women subordinated? Why are women second class citizens? And what she determines is because women's proximity to nature, right, differentiates us in society from men's proximity to building culture, which is domination, right? Which is building up
Oh,
society and culture,
yeah,
right?
okay,
So
yeah,
while I think that this argument is obviously second wave feminist, it's very flawed, right? It doesn't allow for any kind of flexibility
nuance,
in the
yeah,
binaries of what gender does. I
sure,
also think it's at least an acknowledgement of how the South's gender structures have worked, especially if you read a lot of Faulkner or if you read a lot of his inheritors, right? So folks who came after him and were inspired by him. I know we all love maybe David Joy, we're familiar
yeah,
with,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
There's a straight line out of
yeah,
Faulkner's worldview into the worldview of David Joy. And of course, I'm not saying like it's
sure,
all derivative. I'm not saying that
sure,
at all. It's just that that's how literature builds on itself. And we see that a lot in Faulkner is that women's proximity to nature and satisfaction with the natural world, right? Whether that be, characters like Eula Varner Snopes, who's equated to being as lazy as a sweet potato, right? She
mm-hmm,
just simply doesn't move throughout
mm-hmm.
the whole book. Or we see people like Thomas Sutpen and as Absalom, who is gonna build up his plantation fortune, right? He's gonna build and he's gonna make a name for himself, right? I think that
Conquest,
relationship, yeah, that conquest versus being at one with the environment that we're in, that has set up the southern gender binaries. At least there's also a whole big thing about gyneology, so this is class inflected. WJ Cash is a historian of the South, wrote a book years ago called The Mind of the South, and in it he very briefly mentions women in the Old South, but one thing that he mentions is gyneology, so this worship of the purity of the Southern woman, right? The Southern belle. That's also fed into our simultaneous valorization of Southern women, I guess we could say work ethic, while also acknowledging our inherent fragility, right? And our susceptibility in history and historical settings to quote unquote black male sexual violence, right? That mythos emerged
yeah,
out of the belief that Southern women are simultaneously fragile and the ones responsible for the spiritual center of the family.
ornaments, horny ornaments.
Horny ornaments. I
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's a good, I mean, yeah, an interesting
That's a
illustration.
yeah. I always thought the whole thing with like the debutante and the whole thing, that whole ideal was like the grossest thing I've ever seen. Like I don't uh like to parade in this fashion, but you're basically saying here's this thing that I own, and here I am willing for ownership, and I'm willing to put on the cap and gown of my subordination and show you exactly how down on the knee I am to this masculine ideal. It's weird. It freaks me out. Is that wholly Southern, the debutante thing? Is there anything like that up north? Do they do that?
I don't think so. Not that I'm aware of. Not, I mean, I'm sure they have their own version, but not like that whole pageantry and actual like formal event that you have like that.
That's so
No,
weird.
I think
If I'm
that's
not mistaken, so Blaine Roberts has a history called Pageants, Parlors, and Pretty Women. And if I'm not mistaken, from her book, she kind of details the history of pageants in the South. Part of her argument is that it comes out of this like antebellum, I'm pretty sure this antebellum like women debuting to like on the marriage market, or more aristocratic women debuting, and then kind of filtered into the community through, I think, fairs, like state fairs, local fairs. There would be like
Oh
beautiful baby
no!
contests. Yeah. There would be beautiful baby contests. And so at these state fairs, they would, like we evaluate livestock, there would also be like a a women and children evaluation too, like a
oh my
Oh,
contest,
God.
and then that would become
oh,
pageants. Yeah,
Oh my God.
I could have that totally wrong.
No,
I
I think
haven't
you're
read that
right.
book in a minute. I haven't
horrifying.
read that
Yeah.
book in a minute.
I think you're right though. When that all makes sense now. I've never tied that together, but when you just explained that, oh my God. I don't know if I can handle anymore. This is uh this is amazing.
The
Oh my gosh, DJ. Yeah. What are you thinking?
I'm just really enjoying it. This is great.
Me
I knew
too.
Rachel was gonna be, but
Continue,
I knew
Rachel.
she's
Yeah.
yeah.
Will you
well,
explain actually will
sorry,
you
I was just
explain
gonna say I have a question for Rosie about intimacy. So this is something I've thought about a lot through a couple of your episodes I've listened to. I've now helped to no less than two beings, one human, one animal, crossover, right? That's been my experience. I've performed this work that has led to these two beings crossing over. You form an intimacy there with that person that you provide this care for that's unlike anything I've ever known before. And again, I don't want to feed into this overvalorization of the work of caregiving, but it's also kind of irrefutable. And I'm wondering, like, what has been your experience in hospice care with this psychology of like a primarily women dominated industry, having those really intimate connections with your essentially, I mean, I don't want to say customer, but like this is a job, and you are performing a service for someone, but it's a service that becomes so intimate. How have y'all handled that?
that is an excellent question. And you are right. And actually, I even think I have literally used the word intimate before when I've talked about people, or when I've talked about my experience, explaining it to other people. I've said like this is it. It is an honor, and I feel like most people who work in the end of life careers feel the same way. Like it's truly an honor to be trusted and invited into that setting where somebody is at the end of their life, because they have to trust you, and it's so intimate. Like that's very private for a lot of people. Just like when somebody's giving birth to a baby, that can also feel very, very private, and that's also very, very intimate. So I think it depends on the person. Everybody's different. There are some nurses who you can tell are going to remember and hold on to those connections with people they've cared for who've died for the rest of their life. Like it's going to be an emotional, I don't want to call it a burden. It's going to be an emotional thing that they have to deal with for the rest of their life. Also, we have some nurses who tend to, the people who actually are in nursing homes, or in like if there's a hospice house where somebody does come in and has that 24-hour care, those caregivers, I feel like they're more affected than maybe somebody like myself who was more of a case manager role, which sounds like what Carmen was, where that person's there to help you and guide you and manage the symptoms and resources available for you, but maybe not necessarily the person who's always sitting right there when someone is taking their last breath. But But luckily, at least where I work, the team is very aware of the need to support each other in our own bereavement, and they provide space for that. Excuse me, they provide space and time, and they try to make sure that they're um, legitimizing or validating that we can become very connected to these people. And everyone has multiple patients they'll never forget, I mean, but I think you just accept that is how it's going to be. Like, you just accept that you'll have patients you'll never forget, and carry them with you. I don't know. I feel like I just kind of talked in circles a little bit there, but
It just makes me think about one problem I had, I think, in my dissertation. So I wrote chapter 3 of my dissertation on myths of like grannyhood and the self-effacing granny in Appalachian literature. And one book that I think is really powerful and really, really beneficial is Jessica Wilkerson's To Live Here, You Have to Fight. And it's about mid-century women's activism in Appalachia, right? Women fighting the coal
Yeah,
companies and fighting the insurance companies
yeah,
to get their community help and services. And one part of her argument is about this ethic of care that these women infused into their activism, right? And you can't deny it. She provides so many cases of these women, like, you know, uh, participating in activist movements in Appalachia with an ethic of care, from providing elder care, from providing child care, from providing communal care. And it sounds like the hospice industry as well utilizes this kind of ethic of care in the way you associate with each other. But my problem is, in the place where I run into this, um, at what point do we start turning our care and our love into profit, into a means of participating in our own exploitation, right? You love a patient, you go above and beyond for that patient, you work for, you sacrifice your body, your mind, your means in order to provide that care. um and I take issue with the idea that an ethic of care is always good to infuse your work with, because what are you like, who's going to provide that care in return for you? I don't know, I think it's a complicated issue and it's more theoretical than I fully fleshed it out to be. But I worry, especially just when we talk about like activism on the left, right, infusing what we do with an ethic of care, and caregiving, and using that as to springboard into things like mutual aid and into things like standing up for each other. What about the emotional labor there, and who's doing that emotional labor? Is it primarily falling to women? Is
yeah.
it,
I
is it
know
being bestowed on women?
I know every mutual aid group that I'm a part of, that I've ever been a part of, has been ran by women. And
Mm.
I mean, and we're talking about everywhere from Minneapolis to East Kentucky. You know what I mean? Like, and not just a couple of them, a bunch. Every time I've been on a strike, or been to like it's been the women, they've been in the back, they've been filling the bags, they've been organizing the groceries that go out, or when it's time for the kids to get, for like last year for Christmas, or was it like 2 years ago when the miners were on, it was all women doing that. um it's got to take a toll. And Hayden, what's her last name? She's an educator as well, and she came out of the strikes and is a big movement, is a big labor leader now. She talks about it all the time, that the emotional toll that those strikes put on families and put on, women. It's 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 I don't know what the answer is, but I can tell you you're 100% right. I can tell you that it's
mm,
there. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, it's crazy. Like, hearing her talk is crazy. It's it's very sad. And I don't know what the answer is. I don't know how you I don't
I
know.
found
I
one
don't know.
I found one study that like put some numbers to it that really bothered me. And I don't know if I should be bothered by this, but it's Carla Washington's Gender Differences in Caregiving at End of Life, Implications for Hospice Teams. And in it, the authors found that 75% of caregivers are women, which is unsurprising. And one estimate said that $150 billion per year of free caregiving is provided by women. And the average
God.
caregiver is a 49-year-old woman who works outside the home and provides 20 hours per week of unpaid caregiving labor to her mother. And like I hesitate to say that the reason why we push this aside isn't because, especially in like left circles or activist circles or feminist circles, isn't because it's not important. It's because what do we do? Like that mother still needs caregiving, right? So what do we do
Yeah, there
beyond
should be some.
continue the cycle of perpetuating the cycle of an ethic of care that's required for women to bestow on society in order for it to function?
Surely, there should, if you're at end of life, especially if you're a caregiver, if you're giving care, there should be some compensation. If you work at a place, they should allow time off and compensation for your time off. 100%, 100%. You should be able to like that. That should definitely be in there. But I mean, I don't have any hope for our government. I have zero hope, man. It's so bad. They're so bad. It's like I don't know what to say. Yes, you're right. But I don't know. I mean, do we I mean, God, dude, I'm so black pilled right now. I'm like straight like, okay, it's anarchy from here on out. Fuck it. You know what I mean? That's like totally how I feel. So like, God, so defeating. But yes, absolutely. Like these systems should have already been in play. I mean, I remember when my stepfather was dying, they wouldn't even like give my little brother, who's my half brother, but he's my little brother, you know what I mean? They wouldn't give him time off to even go see. There was like no concern there. You know what I'm saying? To go sit with him or anything. It was bizarre. It was bizarre. It's bizarre how we treat that. God, dude. Yeah.
What,
God,
Rachel, what
man.
was the number again? How many billions of dollars worth of unpaid labor?
I read 150 billion.
So I absolutely believe that. It's probably more than that actually, because they're basing that off of what they would pay a professional caregiver, which are wholly underpaid, right? So it's going to be actually worth much, much more than that, which is another part of this whole systemic issue is that, yeah, these roles where somebody is formally working as a caregiver, especially at end of life, are like totally underpaid, obscenely underpaid for the work that's required. So yeah, 150 billion is based off of the wages that our for-profit medical system would pay. Yes, which is not what people should be getting for that care or for
God,
that
it
work.
makes me so mad. Our healthcare system's so shit, man. It's
Yeah,
so shit. It's so garbage. It's so garbage. Oh, but we gonna get some trains.
maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what they say.
We ain't getting shit. They ain't gonna give us nothing. God.
Rachel, I'm thinking about like something you said earlier in the episode is that I've never tied the two together. Now I'm not that smart, so it's not shocking that I've never tied it together. But you mentioned that that women in general tend to be there for like when life is brought into the world. Either we're giving birth or we're assisting somebody who's giving birth, or caring for someone who's just given birth. And then we tend to be there for when somebody's leaving this world. And I've talked with lots of people about that and said, oh yeah, they're really there's birth doulas and there's death doulas, because both of them are a transition either into life or out of life. It's that transition. But I've never tied it together that it's like, but also the people that tend to be there are the women. not necessarily that it's like, oh yeah, you're interested in birth and death because you're interested in the transition. It's like, oh, you were a labor and delivery nurse and now you're going to be a hospice nurse. But either way, you were a female nurse who was caring for those people. Yep.
And not to get too theoretical, but the feminist theorist Simone de Beauvoir had a whole conversation about a cyclical time, right? And part of it is tied to, I think, for her, the biology of cisgendered women's cycles. But I think she also was pointing to labor and the repetitive tasks that we perform, right? So the bringing life into this world, bringing it out, death rituals, birth rituals, and Simone de Beauvoir, she phrased it as something that was resulted in women being in a state of imminence instead of transcendence. And I think that could also kind of tie into what we were talking about earlier with DJ's comment about, why subordination? Well, that's why, if you're constantly stuck in a state of imminence while folks who aren't having to think about the fixity of life and it's the imminence of life's end, you make different choices as well. And I think that kind of also ties into the conversation about gender pay gap. A lot of people like to throw around, oh, well, women are paid less because we pursue different jobs, right? And it's kind of a chicken egg thing. Like, are those jobs underpaid because women, work in them, or what have you? But I think that this is the way that women associate with time, right? Cyclically, based on our own cycles, but also based on life and death cycles, because we're there for them primarily. It also results in the choices that we make psychologically, right? Based in I don't want to reduce women to this, but reaching within the confines of the lives that we see from beginning to end, rather than having that state of removal where it's a lot easier to see yourself as immortal. And it's a lot easier to see yourself if you don't have to bring life into this world or shepherd it out. And I think for a lot of men, that's the case. So there are different choices to be made there along gendered lines.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
That's
well,
beautiful.
Yeah, usually DJ breaks my brain at least once an episode, but Rachel, you have broken mine, and congratulations. I mean, I feel like we need to have you back because this is,
Yeah, for sure. We should
God.
definitely do
Oh
that.
my God.
We should definitely do that.
I was gonna say though, important before I forget. Speaking of life and death cycles at the same time, you want to hear some weird hoodoo
Hell
woo-woo
yeah.
nonsense?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
When my grandmother, the couple, probably three or four weekend trips to my grandmother's before she died, a pregnant cat showed up. A pregnant cat showed up to my grandmother's house. It was just like a stray cat. And my grandmother had always thrown around these names in her dementia state that she liked. And one is she's convinced my aunt had a child named Susanna Clementine. So we were, her mind was in different times. She mostly didn't know who I was. She called me that woman sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And because to her, it was the 80s and I wasn't born yet. Right. It was my sister was little. And that was where she was. But this pregnant cat showed up, and like the day of my grandmother's funeral, I was like, this cat is about to pop. Like, she is going to have these kittens today. So I had bought a kit. This is also some redneck DIY caregiving. I bought this like kiddie pool because the only working bathroom in my grandmother's house was upstairs, BT dubs, and we couldn't get her up there to take a bath. So I'd bought this kiddie pool and a shower chair and this thing that I could hook up to the sink to give my grandmother a bath.
Nice.
And I drug that kiddie pool
yeah.
outside and made like a whelping pool for that cat to give birth in, as we were, in the final days. And I just find those little moments of where
Beautiful.
life and death intersect so, I don't know, poetic, but also just it was enough to make us smile to like see this cat show. She was the sweetest cat too. Oh my God, she just wanted to be in your lap.
I'm gonna cry. Yeah.
That's so sweet.
That is like just that yeah, that cycle of life and death. And it is very poetic that was something that you used to care for your dying loved one, and then we're able to use it for another creature to bring it, bring life into this world.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I'm blown away. Rachel, why don't you give us some more? So you mentioned, tell us of the books that we should all read. How about that?
Well, I think
Sign
if
off.
you're interested in slow death in Southern literature, there are plenty of options to choose from. I think the biggest is going to be As I Lay Dying, right? That's going to be the one that people point to as the ways that Southerners might grieve distinctively, right? Part of the whole of this book is this family carting a dead woman through town and like wanting people to smell her, right, as they pass to see their grief and to be there for her grief. And yeah, it's a family's navigation of that. The next is a much more recent book, I believe 2017, Sing Unburied Sing by Jesmyn Ward. So the matriarch is dying of cancer for the duration of this book, and she bestows a kind of spirituality on her children that they have to very uncomfortably navigate. This is the most beautiful book ever written, like lyrically, and it's heartbreaking and definitely worth interrogating, right? Like I love the rendition of mothers in this book. Jesmyn Ward, so Leonie is the mother who's battling drug addiction and navigating like what kind of mother she wants to be and why exactly she can't be that mother, and it's really devastating. I think another, if you're interested in death and dying in Southern literature, A Death in the Family, James Agee. So he's a Knoxvillian, great option. This is a posthumously published book. He also wrote Let Us Now Praise Famous Men, another couple other really great things. This book is not so much about slow death, it's more so about quick deaths and slow grief. But I think that would also be a really great option for folks who are interested in potentially considering if Southerners might experience death ways differently than folks from other regions. And I think in some cases we do.
Yeah, I think you do too.
That's awesome.
Wow.
Rachel, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thanks for
This has
having me.
been a delight to have you. Oh my gosh. Yeah, do you just want to take over the podcast? I mean, oh my gosh.
Listen.
My brain is
Years
so
ago,
full. Oh,
I got really drunk and I put out a Twitter thread about Dolly Parton. And to my horror, that Twitter thread that I wrote when I was drunk, like kind of went viral. And Corey Forrester asked me, he was like, "You want to come on the podcast, talk about this Twitter thread?" I said, "Hell no. I sound like Boomhauer's little redneck second cousin.
why
No,
not? That's
I don't want to
amazing.
come on." But listen, then the pandemic hit. And for 3 years, I've been recording video lectures for students and captioning them. So I've had to get over it for this past 3 years and tolerate my voice. So yeah, I can definitely talk now.
That's wonderful. Are you ready to talk? Do you want us to reach out to Corey to remind?
No, absolutely. No,
Okay.
no.
Oh, this has been a delight, and I would love to have you back. Oh my gosh, you've just blown my mind so many times. I don't feel like I really have anything intelligent that I can follow up with. Um, I do have a question for you though. So it sounds like as we wrap things up here, so you said that your grandma died in April of this year. And then from there, you just hit the ground running. I mean, you've been boom, 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 working. Do you feel like that grief is like locked up in a compartment in your brain and is going to stay there? Have you had a chance to even start to feel that? Do you want to? You don't have to answer if you don't want to,
That's
but that popped in my head when you were talking about it.
in early June, me and my mom and sister booked a girls' weekend away in the mountains, just to battle our grief.
Yeah.
And we fought the whole time we were out there. I was stressed. I was on deadline with my dissertation. Gus was, not doing well. It
Mhm.
was not the most relaxing trip ever. And we ended that trip just giggling and laughing and loving on each other. And we still are kind of in that place. So I think through like our talking it out through each other, we're able to kind of work through it that way. We made some really, really unfair demands of each other for
Sure,
the past year and a half.
sure.
And I think there's some healing that we've got to do about that
Yeah,
in what we asked of each other. But I also think, and I said this in my dissertation,
Did she freeze or did I freeze?
I
right,
think she.
that's what grief is. It's a chronic symptom of knowing that at some point you were loved. And so at a certain point, I can't try to get rid of my grief, or I don't want to get rid of my grief, because it's just a reminder that my nanny loved me and I miss her. And that doesn't have to be a sad thing, you know?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Did you-
No, I get it.
I'm glad to hear that. No, I'm glad to hear that. I do wonder about that sometimes, especially with women who have cared for someone and they have to immediately after that person dies, they have to go and immediately care for others or care for themselves or, right, another some sort of a caring role. And that grief, yeah, they'll carry that with them until they have a
Well,
chance to kind of feel it.
I don't think I emphasize this enough, but like there also like aren't great outcomes for women who do this kind of end of life caregiving labors always, especially in an informal sense. There's some really well documented studies about the mental health implications of this, and kind of, at best case, it's not something that seems like it necessarily serves a lot of women to do permanently, but that expectation is there. I don't know, Rosie, if you have a different take on this, but just in a couple of the studies that I've encountered, it's been something that is well documented, that like this constant kind of self effacement that we participate in by performing these labors, either in a CNA capacity or as a personal caregiver for a loved one, it doesn't always result in positive mental health outcomes. I think that's kind of obvious, but
Yeah,
yeah. So I think that's why it definitely needs more urgency as we have feminist conversations about labor, because while this might often be informal or a trade, a skilled profession in the hospice industry, it's still something that merits reconsideration if we want to progress our relationship to women's work in the future.
100%.
absolutely agree.
Yeah, 100%. We're all I mean, yeah, talk to any healthcare worker. We're all quote unquote crazy. And it's because, yeah, like you just carry
Mhm.
this constant the weight of society expecting you to care for others, whether you're paid or if you're just expected to do it, yeah, as unpaid labor. Yeah, you are correct. So thank you. I want to will you send me the titles of those books again? Like type them out to me because I want to include those on our yeah, I want to actually have those available for people to link to on our social media, and definitely have you back. I feel like there's so much more we could talk about.
For
Um,
sure.
yeah, this was wonderful. Thank you for joining us
Yeah,
today,
thank
Rachel,
you.
Bryan, DJ.
Thank
Take it
you.
away.
Do
Thanks
what
for
now?
having me.
Yeah, yeah. It's great to see you again.
It's good to see you too.
Maybe we'll be in Knoxville next summer. That might be fun.
DJ, are you gonna be in at the Well Read Zanies?
I hate Nashville with such
Same,
yeah. I have such
same.
disdain for all of it. No, no, no. But
Gotcha.
it's
My whole family lives there, so I'm gonna have to go whether I want to or not. I hate
yeah.
Nashville though too.
Well, have fun.
Have a great time.
Okay.
Yeah. So this episode's probably going to come out actually this week. So it'll come out before that the Well Read show. So anybody listening, just so you know, Rachel will probably be there.
I will. Oh, 100%. Oh, that's so embarrassing. No. Oh, I'm not going to say what show I'm going to.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. There you go.
It's a secret.
We
Yeah,
won't tell
keep it.
either.
All right,
Thank you
guys.
so much, Rachel. Everyone, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Stay safe. Bye-bye.